everybody. Welcome to today's webcast. We have a very interesting topic and a very exciting speaker to talk about customer-obsessed cultures. My name is Demet Tunc. I'm the Council Director for Customer Experience Council at the Conference Board. Before we introduce you the content of the webcast, let me update you on a couple of housekeeping rules. You can ask questions during the webcast via the chat box that appears at the bottom left of your screen. You're free to download the presentation. It will be available via the file download pod in the bottom center of your screen. You can share this program with your colleagues and also within your network. It will be available on demand. You may full screen the video or the PPT at any time by clicking on the arrows. You can also complete the brief evaluation form at the end of the webcast so that we get your feedback and we will be able to improve ourselves for the future webcasts. Let me also remind you that you can earn CP credits. To be able to do so, you need to type your full name and email address in the space provided. You need to stay online for the entire webcast and click on the 3 pop-ups that will occur during the program. So that's all about the housekeeping rules. Let me now introduce you to my speaker, Stuart Crawford-Browne. Stuart is an international researcher. He's an expert in marketing, customer experience, and also brand management and strategy. He has broad experience in employee management, innovation, technology, and business strategy. Stuart is also a regular judge at the Customer Experience Awards in the UK. Today, he's going to talk to us about customer-obsessed cultures, how customer centricity is playing a critical role in the customer experience programs that the organizations are running. He will also take us through the leadership behaviors and the impact of leadership on creating a customer-obsessed culture within the organizations. So, Stuart, if you're online, thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you here, and we're all looking to the content that you will take us through.
Thank you very much, Demet. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I think it's a very exciting area. It's fantastic that so many people have registered to join us today.
Yeah, exactly. Today we have over 100 registrations across the world. We have many participants from the US, from Asia, and also from Europe. So it's exciting to have all of them here. And by the way, not related to the webcast, but I think it's very important to mention Happy Thanksgiving to the participants from the US. Okay, now I hand over the microphone to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Demet. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, customer centricity and developing customer-centric. This is really an exciting area that we see important for many organizations, not only consumer organizations, but business-to-business organizations. So I'm going to really take you through some ideas that will help you in terms of frameworks and what is it that we expect organizations can do to kind of ignite the passion within the organization around customer obsession and create a culture that's really going to provide differentiation as well as competitive advantage, which is really what we are trying to achieve as organizations are seeking to address changes in the environment. One question that often comes up is, I thought about what is the most important strategic asset of organizations in today's environment? And I would argue that it's really your customers. Without your customers, it's great to have fantastic products and services, but really at the end of the day, it's about making sure that customers are satisfied, and what you're providing is providing loyalty and a sense of enduring performance for the business. So the customer strategy is an increasingly important part of what the key leadership team is focused on in today's environment.
Well,
so looking forward,
Stuart, if I may interrupt, I think everybody is aware that customer experience is a priority. And there are so many initiatives, so many programs that are trying to successfully implement customer experience programs. But we often see that they're not always sustainable, and they're not always bringing growth, revenue, profitability to the company. So will you also be elaborating on that? Why is that the case?
Yes, I think it's really important for organizations that are putting customer experience programs in place, also employee engagement programs, to understand how these elements fit together and how to move beyond the core metrics that they might be embedding in the organization to really changing the way the business is run and the operating model in many cases. So what we'll be looking at is leadership behaviors that can help to frame the conversation in organizations, particularly when we see flatlining NPS scores or some challenges in terms of employee engagement.
Okay, thank you.
So on my next slide, I wonder who recognizes this building on the left-hand side. This is the Amazon headquarters in Seattle. It was opened about 2 years ago. It's a $250 million building. It's part of a 3-building complex that really is the center of Amazon in terms of its headquarters. It's a sustainable building, and it's created an environment that's really about encouraging innovation and change. And all around the building, we see this mantra, day one, day one. And if you know Amazon, and you know much about Amazon, you'll probably know that this is at the core of Jeff Bezos' overall CEO. So what does day one really mean, and why is this important to an organization we know that has been so successful in many years and very good at adapting to change? Why is day one highlighted? And if we read the shareholder letters every year from Jeff Bezos, why does he focus on this concept? Well, what is day one really about? It's about staying in an environment that embraces innovation and change, and also embraces the digital environment in terms of the internet. And here's a quote from Jeff Bezos in terms of what it really means for the organization when it comes down to making a difference. Experimenting patiently, accepting failure, planting seeds, protecting saplings, and doubling down when you see customer delight. And what he does say is a customer-obsessed culture creates the best conditions where all of these things can happen. So what he really sees as key value for his leadership team is to create an environment where success can be bred and nurtured. And we see this across not just the core that has developed both on consumer side, but also on the business-to-business side. AWS is an incredible business just by itself, let alone the other capabilities that we are seeing as we see a collaboration with other organizations. Now we see the Alexas being rolled out at Marriott hotels across the world as part of an integrated, seamless experience, customer experience that's being driven. So there are a range of different opportunities that this creates for the organization, but it does come from these core values from the top of the organization. So somebody asked recently at an all-hands event at Amazon, well, what does day two look like? And we have a video clip here to show what the response to that was from Jeff Bezos. Can I pass over to our team?
Okay, I think this one is a very important question. What does day two look like? What does day two look like? I know the answer to this. Day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day one. Thank you, you guys.
So, sobering clip, but it's also a call to action, and I guess slightly humorous as well. But essentially, we can see that not only is this about the organizational way of staying on day one, but also being acutely aware of this environment that we are operating in today. And a key element where its leadership team stands, are they at the top table when it comes down to decision making within the organization? And how can customer experience and customer centricity drive the organization, not only in terms of being highly responsive to the needs of customers, but also understanding how to adapt and change and how to create a new philosophy with the way that business is conducted. And so one of the key challenges we see is for leadership teams, the head of customer experience or chief operating officer or chief customer officer, to integrate with marketing and other functions within the organization to really help the C-suite to engage with customers in the way that we see at Amazon and other organizations. Particularly within Silicon Valley, we're seeing a key philosophy coming through in terms of not only being customer-centric, but also this idea of customer obsession. And this really comes from a move from products and services to experiences to subscription-based software. So what we see in many organizations that are embracing digital is a realization that the operating model is changing, and that what needs to happen is ongoing loyalty needs to be managed as part of retention of customers. And that's not only on the
Stuart, I need
consumer
to,
side, but also on the
Stuart, I need to
side.
interrupt you. I'm so sorry. The quality of the audio on your side is not very good. So I will ask the audience to be patient for a couple of seconds so that the team here tries to fix it.
All right. All right. I'll do that. That work?
Okay, now we'll try to show Stuart only with the headshot, and he's going to show the presentation only. We're hoping that it will improve the audio quality.
I hope you can hear me better now. I apologize if there's any problems.
It's much better, Stuart, now.
Is that better? Very good. Right, so as I was saying, what we're seeing is a change in focus as part of digital transformation, and many organizations are struggling with the way that they need to adapt and change. Customer experience is a key part of this, and it's important that it's at the leadership team within large organizations is really responding to this. So my question to you is your CX leadership team influencing decisions at the senior level within your organization? And if not so, is that something that you should perhaps look at?
Well, I would assume that if the customer experience is represented in the boardroom, at the senior management team, that would be in the agenda of that organization. If not, it would not be in top of mind for the organizations, right?
Yes, that's right. And it depends very much on the operating environment of the organization. Of course, many organizations are in quite traditional sectors, and changes aren't as rapid in that environment, but we do still see changes happening. And I think that it's about organizations understanding where they want to be and understanding what legacy thinking is appropriate, but also understanding what new thinking is appropriate in the organization. Being able to bring that in and understanding this balance between traditional products, services, and solutions, as well as developing experiences. And also the other element I would suggest is looking at customer success, understanding to what degree they have a role to play in the success of their clients and their customers. So from why is this important at the moment? I would say that there are a couple of key trends that we're seeing coming through in terms of customer-obsessed culture being critical right now. I've been alluding to disruption, and we see digital transformation as one of those elements, but there are other elements that we're seeing, as I mentioned, that are changing operating models. Certainly a concern about commoditization. In the business environment today, it's highly competitive, but also very difficult to differentiate. So how can organizations find a way past commoditization? We see rising expectations of customers and clients, and often the suggestion is that the last great experience that they had sets those expectations for any other interactions they have with any other businesses that they work with or any other brands that they have interactions with. And then finally, the idea of social media. And not is this just about traditional social media platforms. I think it's about thinking about communication differently. The way we communicate with customers, the way we communicate with employees is changing. So this is about understanding how to embed that in the organization in a way that drives performance and makes the organization more efficient and also more effective overall as a business. So on the next slide, I have a couple of challenges that may sound familiar to you in terms of the organizational environment you're working in. As I mentioned, customers are certainly changing their expectations, but also we see a changing environment when it comes down to regulations, digital environment, the digital transformation activities, and also internal challenges for organizations and how they change and adapt to an environment that's becoming increasingly choppy waters out there. So from a customer perspective, we often see a pressure to reduce customer effort in customer journeys while still building engagement and value. And then also this challenge of flatlining metrics, customer metrics such as NPS, CSAT, and customer effort. Building trust is increasingly a challenge. On the regulation side, we see that there's pressure from regulators to show that the firm is acting in the best interests of customers. Certainly here in the UK, the Financial Services Authorities, the FCA, and other regulatory authorities are applying pressure on organizations to change their culture and to put customers first in the way that they do business. And that is increasingly a challenge for highly regulated sectors to really make adjustments to the way that they do business and to be more transparent and more accountable to their customers and clients. On the digital transformation side, we see that digital transformation is often fantastic and highly relevant and really important for a lot of businesses to adopt, but it's not necessarily easy. So it can often cause disconnects across the business and also create a challenge between legacy systems and new systems. And not just in terms of technology, but also in thinking within the organization. So challenges in terms of legacy thinking, the way things have always been done, and new ways of operating and understanding how to get the best out of both worlds and how to bring those together effectively and how to make that relevant for all employees, not just new employees who have digital skills coming in and millennials, but also the leaders and members of the organization that have the knowledge and wisdom who've been there for many years sometimes, and also understand how the organization has evolved over time. So there's a real challenge in terms of changing the organizational environment effectively. And then moving back to culture, so challenges after mergers, acquisitions, and restructuring, a real challenge for many organizations to change and to adapt, and often a lack of clarity on how to embed a customer-centric culture into the DNA of the organization. So this is a great idea. Customer centricity and customer obsession sound like great ideas, but what does it really mean in tangible nuts and bolts when it comes down to how my employees or how my team or how my leaders should be changing their behavior, and what types of actions should we be embracing and rewarding in terms of new thinking?
So is there a framework, Stuart, that captures all of these different aspects to help the companies?
Yes, so we'll be moving on to look at some frameworks that might be valuable for organizations, not only in terms of understanding what the dynamics are that they need to address, what types of disciplines they need to address, but also the new types of behaviors that employees should be embracing as part of the way that they should be changing. So the next slide I have is really the idea of this sort of reality gap, I guess, between companies and customers, and this idea that when you speak to many organizations and their leaders, they feel that they really have things buttoned down. They've probably got a strategy in place, and there's probably a great deal of work that's being put in place to really change and address the changing needs of customers. But often when you speak to customers, there's still this disconnect. Customers don't necessarily agree that the organizations are as customer focused as they could be. And I think this comes down to an idea of what's known as anticipatory organizations. A lot of products and services that in the digital world, as soon as they arrive, they are increasingly redundant. They may not necessarily be the cutting edge services that have already been evolved by organizations. The product life cycles are much more rapid. So organizations are having to struggle and adapt and be more agile to see how they can not only address existing and current customer needs, but also anticipate future needs more effectively. And this comes down to understanding trends and responding to those trends. And we'll tap into this in more detail later on.
So what you're saying, Stuart, is that this data already shows us that most of the time the companies are using an inside-out approach instead of a customer-back, market-back approach. And that is probably the reason why it's only 10% of the customers that agree that the change is not seen, is not valued at the customer side.
That's right. And I think it's also this idea that we need to not only embrace an organization that's customer focused, but we need to think more aggressively about being customer-centric, and this idea of customer obsession, which I'll define in more detail in a minute, and think about how the organization can be forward-looking, future-thinking, not just responsive and agile, but also future-thinking. That's the challenge, I think, going forward to address this gap between the organization and the world that the customer sees.
Okay.
So thinking about product-centric versus customer-centric, I think that this is an image that was helpful just to show how we see changes happening in organizations and how organizations can adapt their products and services. Not only is this about designing with the user experience in mind, which increasingly we see is relevant within digital, but also in ergonomics and the products and services we see around us, but also understanding how systems and processes within the organization can be more effective. And it's really about not just making more successful end products, but also understanding how to engineer this into the business all the way from the manufacturing process and design process right through to that end experience. And I think that if you look at Salesforce and what they call a sort of a new decision framework, this is a helpful reference to how to think about a customer effort. So when we look at how we sell, how we service customers, how we market and design products, and also how we build communities to service our clients and customers, it's very helpful to look at customer effort and employee effort. And what we see sometimes is a tendency to try and add value by adding new products and services for customers and clients, a new app to download or a new VIP experience. But often what's really important is to focus on reducing effort as a key priority initially. So making sure that your products and services and experiences are reduce friction and are highly intuitive for customers, but also for employees. And we see that new technology is fundamental in many ways to making this happen. Mm-hmm. So we see, for instance, Salesforce have this as a decision framework, and for their key clients, it's really about enabling reduced effort for customers and employees by embedding new systems. And I would argue that this is when we move to the cloud, which is really where we see technology evolving and growing. This is probably one of the cornerstones of cloud-based technologies, reducing effort and making sure that not only are things accessible everywhere, but also they're highly intuitive and in the way that they work, and really enable employees and empower employees and help them to collaborate in ways that makes it easier for them to serve clients and customers.
So the e-commerce, the digital platforms, they should find a way to enable the customers to purchase their product with just one click, right? That is one part of reducing the effort, for example, which is not the case. So the user experience is usually, not all the time, not in all the platforms, but it's usually not that easy, and which is not creating a good customer experience at the end of the day.
That's very true. I think in the old days we used to say three clicks on a website was good navigation, but I think you're right. Now we're coming down to a point where it's highly intuitive and one click. And we see with Amazon, they've really pushed hard on this. And we see now with the Amazon Go retail environment that they're creating, the idea is that you have no checkout experience. We've seen Apple reinvent retail by reducing effort and changing the way that stores work. We see Amazon Go bringing a new retail experience, and we see other organizations also reducing effort, finding ways to make it highly intuitive and engaging for their clients and customers. Now, the next slide I have is really about understanding the challenges that we face by ignoring culture in a digital environment. So BCG has done some research that identified that there was essentially a culture clash when digital transformation activities were happening. And often, if this was not addressed as part of digital transformation, that really hampered efforts to make digital transformation successful. So they looked at 40 specific engagements where digital transformation took place. And of those, they identified that in organizations where culture had been addressed, they were 5 times more successful when it came down to profitability and a profitable performance overall as a result of the digital transformation. And furthermore, when they looked at sustained performance over 3 years or more, they saw that actually 80% of organizations who had sustained business performance that was successful had addressed culture as part of the digital transformation activities. And they go on to identify these 5 core elements of a digital culture. And we'll be looking at these in more detail later on. But certainly this idea of collaboration is key. This idea of empowerment is key. Elements that really change the way that the organization is functioning, and making sure that that there are ways for culture to successfully support the technology and the changes to processes that are being developed and implemented.
Stuart, will you also be talking about some real case studies on how companies implement a customer-centric culture?
Yes, I will do. I'll be looking at a framework, and I'll also be looking at some case studies. I'll also be looking at some of the winners of the Customer Experience Awards here in the UK, and what it is that made them stand out for their performance.
Okay.
So what is it that makes customer-obsessed culture different to, let's say, just being customer-focused or just general customer centricity? And we'd argue that it's this capability to understand, predict, and respond to customers, markets, and competitor dynamics. It's also about transcending departments and functions, breaking down silos, and making sure that it's an integral part of the way that all employees behave and perform, not just frontline staff, but increasingly back office staff are responsible for making a difference for customers and for clients. And we see this particularly in organizations where in the past innovation was left to marketing and sales, maybe the product development teams, but increasingly maybe we're seeing other functions in the organization being involved in managing that, such as in the insurance environment, underwriting used to be very much back office function, but in an innovation environment where apps are being developed to provide insurance in the car, pay-as-you-go insurance, we need to be able to calculate loss ratios and do quite advanced underwriting activities as part of the actual product development and innovation activities. So I think more is being asked for employees across the organization in the way that they actually get involved in customer-centric and customer-obsessed activities.
So what you're saying is that it's not only the job of the sales and marketing teams to embrace customer centricity, but it's the role of the whole organization, of all functions, probably from HR to manufacturing. What do they need to do to be more customer centric?
Absolutely, and we certainly see that this is the case at organizations like Amazon and Salesforce, but other organizations that are really aggressive in the way that they look after customers, understand customers, and see that as a central part of their operating model. It's about everybody in the organization taking responsibility.
Okay.
There's also this idea of a mindset change, and this idea that the organization really needs to shift to this idea of what's best for the customer is best for the business. It's not just about optimizing performance from a financial perspective, it's also about understanding that there are long-term gains by investing short-term in customer outcomes. And that often is a leap of faith for many organizations that are used to really delivering for mainly for shareholders and for share price and other important objectives of the organization. But it really often needs to be a balance between understanding that it makes sense to invest, and while it might be expensive in the short term, there are often advantages in the long term in putting the customer first for the organization. And then this final point is something that I would suggest actually is what makes an organization customer obsessed. It's this idea of being relevant and responsive all the time. It's about being connected in real time. And it's also about developing emotionally charged customer relationships, because I think what we see is that customers are increasingly recognized as people, and we have a balance between the advantages of technology and the advantages of being people-led businesses. In building relationships with large accounts in a B2B environment, but it's also important on the front line, making sure that customers feel that organizations really care about them, and also organizations really care about the environment that they operate in. So the next chart is kind of a systems thinking approach, if you like, and understanding how different elements come together to drive the system overall in creating customer-centric behaviors. Certainly the corporate culture is important in terms of creating a customer-centric behaviors that are based around the values of the organization, but also this links to customer experience design and this idea of building out the design of customer experiences around UX and other capabilities that help the organization to, on an operational level, to be much more engaged with customers. But this is all really about customer outcomes and understanding how to drive loyalty, advocacy, and also acquisition activities. The results we see are really come down to bottom line business performance indicators such as profitability and growth, productivity, also employee engagement activities. These all come together to make sure that there is, if you like, a virtuous circle in the way that the organization is performing.
Yeah, I would assume that if the customers are happy, that would translate into no, it's vice versa. If the employees are happy and engaged, then you would have happy customers and engaged customers. So they are very much connected to each other. So it's very true that the employee engagement scores are highly related to the customer satisfaction, customer loyalty, and other metrics such as NPS.
Absolutely. Demet, I think you did right in terms of understanding how we need to bring all of these elements together, because a lot of customer experience programs focus very much on NPS and other metrics. Employee scores are often looked at, but seldom are these brought together to understand holistically how the organization is performing. And there are some organizations that certainly put employees first in the way that they nurture their employees, recognize that that has a fundamental knock-on effect in how they manage their employees often means happy customers. That's certainly the case. And I think that we are realizing that as we see the working environment change, the expectations of employees are changing too. They expect to work for companies that are nurturing their employees and also acting in the best interests of customers. And this comes back to the war on talent in some ways, where we see younger employees particularly are drawn to companies that have social purpose and meaning, as well as being a great place to work, which is enjoyable place, an engaging place to work, where they feel they're making a difference. So the next slide is really about some research that was done looking at customer-obsessed culture. An organization called Market Culture basically wrote a book about this. They spent three years speaking to many organizations that are known as leaders in terms of how they perform overall as organizations, but also how the culture of their organization influences the way that they do business. And after many years of quite rigorous research, looking not only at data, but also doing direct interviews with senior executives of these organizations, they identified that there was a core trend, and this was really that they all exhibit a high level of customer-centric behavior and decision-making in the way that the organization is run. And they've written a book about this, and they've also developed a framework that helps to articulate, well, what does this really mean in terms of how businesses should be changing the way that they operate. And they've in fact been able to put together what they would call the 8 disciplines of the customer-obsessed culture. So these are key behaviors that drive profit for organizations. And if you look closely at the chart, we've got these 8 dimensions. And this is in a framework known as the Market Responsiveness Index. Notice that it's not just the Customer-Centric Index or thing like the Customer-Obsessed Index. It's really about a Market Responsiveness Index. And I'll walk you through some of these dimensions and explain why they're important. So we have 5 external dimensions or 5 external factors which the organization really needs to focus on as part of the way that they drive the business operating model. The customer insight, customer foresight, competitive insight, competitive foresight, and provision. Now, these elements should be no surprise for organizations in terms of marketing-led organizations, because these are often seen as marketing functions. But increasingly, there's a realization that these are elements that make a difference to how the organization is actually functioning in important ways, bringing the right information into decision-making activities, not just for marketing and sales, but increasingly across the organization. As we mentioned earlier, this is increasingly about empowering employees across the organization. And also we have these 3 internal enablers, really important in terms of how employees interact and work together. Strategic alignment. This is the degree to which the vision and mission of the organization is understood from the top of the organization right down to the front line. Collaboration. This is really about how well the organization and employees all work together. We see that digital solutions and platforms are increasingly relevant and important in driving this forward. And also this idea of empowerment, making sure that frontline staff, but also middle management, which often have challenges of their own, are empowered to take decisions to act in the best interest of customers. So all of these elements are key to the success of making sure that an organization is agile, responsive to customers, and are really embracing these ideas of customer obsession. And this framework has been put together as a benchmarking framework. 400 organizations have really gone through this assessment framework, helps them to understand, well, what are we really good at? How can we improve? And by benchmarking against other organizations, many of these are business-to-business organizations, but also some consumer organizations. Many are Silicon Valley based, but also across APAC and Europe, understanding how they can respond and adapt by basically doing gap analysis and setting out a roadmap for improvements across a range of 40 different questions that are part of the self-assessment. as well as verbatim responses that help the organization to be honest with themselves. How are we really doing? Where do we need to allocate resources? How can we actually improve the way that we are adapting and changing as we take on digital transformation and other activities?
Stuart?
Yes.
This is a great framework because it gives a picture of also the need to change the behavior, the culture in the companies. My question is about the outcome of the study in B2B compared to B2C. Does this market responsiveness index indicate any differences or huge differences between B2B and B2C?
Well, what we do see is that there are organizations that are high performers, and they may not necessarily be consumer organizations. They may also be business-to-business organizations. But we do see big gaps between those high performers and then organizations that maybe are around average. And to be fair, a lot of organizations that have done this assessment, understand that they are on a journey, and often they've made big leaps and bounds already. So we are looking at many organizations that are already high performers in this space. But certainly, I would say that it's really an understanding of how the leadership teams in these organizations compare and contrast to each other in the way that they view the business and the way that they respond and act to customers. And it doesn't necessarily have a difference in terms of sector. Certainly, I think tech and maybe retail is more aggressive and proactive in this environment than, let's say, sectors like utilities. But even with telecoms, we see some great players that are really trying to strive to make changes. And in utilities too, we see innovation happening. So I think across the board, there are some great stories and case studies to reflect on.
So what you're saying is that it's not the difference between B2B and B2C. What is important is having a high performance culture, which would create a customer obsessed culture.
Absolutely, that's correct. And it's the vision from the top of the organization that often has the most influence. It's really difficult to influence culture from the center of the organization or from the front line. So it really is up to the leadership team to be part of this activity.
Okay. Stuart, I think it would be very good if we go to the examples, to the real case studies.
Sure, I can do. If I skip through to, we've got some quotes here that are helpful to look at, and you'll certainly see them in the presentation deck, which will be shared. But these are examples: Starbucks, Intel, also peripheral vision from Facebook. I think that this is one that's particularly interesting because I think this idea of peripheral vision is really taps into what I was talking about earlier, this idea of being an anticipatory organization that understands hard trends and can distinguish between soft trends and hard trends and really tap into hard trends as we see changes in our environment, our business environment, also in our society overall. So social media is one of these hard trends, I would argue, and Facebook has been one of the leaders in terms of really capitalizing on this in terms of their operating model. But other organizations, I think, are realizing that peripheral vision is an area where they need to spend time and energy to understand not only how to be agile, because it's great to be agile and responsive and relevant now, but also what is it that the customers will need in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time. And particularly when we look at autonomous vehicles and the life cycle in, let's say, in developing a vehicle these days, it really means that organizations need to be looking 5 or 10 years ahead in many cases to really understand how to build their organization out to be successful.
Okay.
I think another great example is looking at strategic alignment from Toyota. So here, this is a view that is about understanding that the customer doesn't care about the whole world. Even though Toyota is a fantastic organization and globally recognized as a leader, what they often really care about is very localized. And in their local town, that's where they need to make a difference. So it's this idea of, particularly for global organizations, understanding how they can be responsive and relevant right down on the ground where those decisions are being made by the customer. And often it's about understanding how to influence and collaborate with partners. So if you think about Toyota working with, let's say, independent dealer franchise networks or other operators, it's increasingly important for them to understand how to be responsive and take that vision of the organization and deliver it in a very localized way.
Okay. Stuart, we have a question from the audience. I think it relates back to the slide you've shown before about the hard trend versus a soft trend. So the question is, what's the difference between hard trends and soft trends?
Very good question. A soft trend is a trend that may be identified that may happen. But a hard trend is a trend that can be determined that will happen. So it's this idea of getting it right, understanding which trends are really important, which ones will really happen, and which ones look interesting but actually aren't going to be things that are important. And so that's an important distinction for organizations as part of their insight and foresight capability, being able to differentiate between those two elements and making sure that they have certainty around the trends that they do follow.
Okay, thank you.
Telstra is a great example in terms of addressing empowerment as part of their leadership model. And I think one of the things that they realized when they were looking at empowerment as a challenge, they thought it was really about providing the tools and capabilities to frontline staff so they could make better decisions. But the closer they got to the problem, they realized, in fact, this was not just about that. It was also about building the confidence of employees in the organization. And that meant it was not only about systems and processes and the digital capability, it's also about this idea of mentoring and training and developing the people skills within the organization, and framing this in a way that is enabling employees and leaders in the organizations to be agents for their customers and clients. So that gives you a fairly good overall view, I think, of the MRI, as they call it, the Market Responsiveness Index, these 8 disciplines of a customer-obsessed culture, and you get some idea of what this assessment looks like. It's essentially an assessment that can be done with it's very flexible design in terms of how many employees get involved in doing it, but it helps the organization to really get some feedback from key management decision makers in the organization and understand how they feel the organization is performing on all of these elements, and then benchmark against great organizations that are getting it right to understand where the gaps are and how to improve. If you look at the overall framework, I would characterize this as measuring customer culture within the lens of customer experience and employee experience, bringing those two elements together, but also being very laser focused on business outcomes. So this is really about understanding which of these 8 dimensions drive which customer and which business outcomes, and how to capitalize on those based on the strategic priorities of the organization. And then it's also about how to transform the culture. So it's about understanding change and how to embed change effectively in the organization. And this idea of a framework, discover, engage, ignite, secure, and fortify, is part of the MRI framework, where they have these steps that enable the organization to not only understand the data, but also embed change within the behaviors and actions of employees in the organization. That's really important in terms of making sure there's a proper transformation of the culture. So some quick case studies which might be helpful for you. So Vodafone are an example of an organization here in the UK who conducted the MRI. Vittorio Celà was the CEO of Vodafone, and he had some problems in terms of managing a very complex organization across 28 markets, having problems with NPS scores flatlining, and also getting feedback that customers were still complaining about the performance overall, even though there were improvements being made across the organization, and not having a framework for culture and understanding how to make a cultural change. So he read the book and really found it useful and decided to go ahead and do the MRI. This was done with 3,500 employees or more across these 28 markets, key leaders from each part of the organization conducted the MRI, and out of this came an initiative called We Care, amongst other initiatives. This initiative was really about the onboarding activities for employees and making sure that employees at Vodafone really demonstrated they had empathy for customers, that they went the extra mile for customers, and were really caring. And this has now been embedded quite successfully across the organization. They've seen improvements on their NPS scores, and also it's being lined up with their new IoT services and 5G services, helping to reframe what an organization that's always been good in terms of quality, but maybe not great in terms of being a slightly cold organization. So here they've really tried to warm that organization for customers and make it a more personal experience. BlackRock is another interesting example. So enterprise customers at BlackRock were getting increasingly impatient with the quality and speed of reports that were being delivered to them. The account managers who looked after them were frustrated that the organization didn't appreciate how serious this was. And the MRI helped to basically do customer immersion sessions that helped the back office teams to appreciate how important it was to improve the quality, speed, and detail within these reports that were going to enterprise customers. And that made a big difference in not only the quality and reputation for BlackRock, but also bottom line performance was improved as a result of retention of key clients. Thirdly, Westpac is an Australian bank involved in a range of retail activities, but their challenge was really on the loan side, and there they had a disconnect between the collections department doing what they thought was correct for the organization, essentially calling up customers who defaulted on their loans and helping and really sometimes aggressively getting them to pay back their loans or resolve things quickly. And what happened was the MRI helped to reframe the collections department as the customer retention department. So it helped to change the conversation and the way that engagement with customers was taken care of, to make sure that it was much more about empathy and helping these customers in a way that was a win-win for those customers, help them in a way that was more understanding, and in the end, improve the performance of that department overall within the organization. So these are three just useful examples that give you an idea of how the MRI can actually make a difference on the ground and to frontline teams, boosting morale, but also driving business performance.
Okay, so MRI actually, Market Responsiveness Index, provides a good framework to understand and also to implement towards customer centricity, which is good. Will you also be showing, I just see it on the screen, some examples from the Customer Experience Awards in the UK, as you're a judge there?
That's correct. Yeah, so this is an interesting event that's been growing and grown from strength to strength really over the last few years. This event in 2018 had, I think, over 800 attendees, and what happens is it's a full day event of judging and presentations to the judges, and then awards for performance. And what we've seen is organizations are increasingly taking this seriously as an important part of not only winning awards, but really as a catalyst in the organization for really trying to embed changes and become more customer centric. So this year we've seen some great examples. Certainly a high standard. Skipton Building Society, I think, was one of the organizations that's done particularly well this year. They won 3 awards. And some of that work was to do with a program they called S-Link. So they've identified this, I guess you could call it a hard trend, that within 5 years' time, there'll be a severe drop in the number of customers that actually visit their branches. So they have actually built a capability where they can have a video conferencing capability with their customers, and they can also sign documents over the system. So they can really engage with customers wherever they are and support the branch activities with this virtual service. They've also had some other activities that they've done which were particularly interesting in the past. They've been very involved in dementia services, so understanding how their branch teams can support customers with dementia and really not only improve the way that they service these customers, but also to make sure the entire organization is sensitive to the needs of these customers. And one particular branch scaled these activities across the entire company, and they've now had a trainer system where they've basically got somebody in every branch who's an expert in dementia. Also, we've seen BT doing some great work this year with digital transformation activities, driving through activities with their contact centers around their brand values, making sure that it's personal, and also making sure that it's simple and brilliant. So making sure that those conversations that happen, what they're calling great conversations, embody a customer-centric and customer-obsessed approach to the way that customers are looked after. And they've really seen a huge improvement on NPS scores, as well as morale and employee engagement and overall business performance. EE is another great example. They've also done a great deal of work with their contact centers, changing the culture there, bringing in new virtual services, so helping troubleshoot virtual software, and also changing the way that employees are trained to interact with customers, making it more personal, understanding how to use empathy skills, and understanding a bit of psychology also as part of how they conversations with customers. And then finally, Vitality is an organization here who are an insurance company who are focused very much on making sure that their customers are healthy, and they win awards and points for exercise. And they have collaborated with Apple Watches, and if you basically become a Vitality customer, you receive an Apple Watch which helps you monitor and record your weekly or daily activities, and you can win rewards and incentives as a result of that. And this program has not only been growing successfully in the UK, but we've seen a range of other social purpose that has been spun off in terms of what the work is that Vitality is doing, trying to embrace technology and bring that to the table, but also making sure that they are making a difference in communities and supporting communities. So that gives you a snapshot, if you like, of what we are seeing in terms of best practice from the UK in terms of customer experience activities.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stuart. It's quite interesting to see the value of this framework with also best practices and some case studies, also some examples from the UK Customer Experience Awards. Before we close the webcast, we have a small evaluation form. Please fill that in so we improve ourselves for the future webcasts. I would like to thank you, Stuart, for the preparation and attendance to this webcast, and to the audience for being with us and listening to this interesting content. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Demet. Thank you to everyone.